Good evening and welcome everybody. This is another webinar in our series Careers in History. Before I say anything else, I usually first check the audio and would like all participants to type in a quick OK if they can hear me. I can see several participants typing. Wonderful. Fantastic. At this point, I want to ask all the presenters to activate their microphones and all the participants to disable their microphones. While I certainly encourage questions later on from our student participants, I ask that you type these questions into the chat and not use your microphones, because these webinars work best when we limit the amount of data that we want to transfer at any given time. So once again, welcome everybody. Tonight we have a fantastic group of people that will tell us about careers in the federal government. And as always, I want to remind you that this is a recorded session and that you can retrieve these recordings later on in a web format. I usually send out emails with links for all of our webinars the night after the recording. So tonight you will get another email from me sending you the link to the recording. I hope that you spread the word about these webinars and let other students know about this opportunity. And keep in mind that this is the fourth in the series. We had 3 last semester. The first one in September was about teaching. The second in October was about careers in public history. And in November, we had 4 editors talk about careers in publishing and writing. So tonight, we will talk about careers in the federal government. And I want to move on and give you a bit of a layout of what we're planning to do here. First, I will introduce you to our panel members who will tell us about their jobs, what makes it interesting, what makes it challenging. They will talk a little bit about their own paths from college to career. We'll describe their work environment. We'll lay out for you the ways in which their history BAs or history MAs, to the extent that that is applicable, has prepared them for their jobs. One of our participants today will also talk specifically about the ways in which you can prepare for your career in the federal government. Our participants will share their lessons, we'll give some advice for you, and then at the end there should be plenty of time for you to type in and ask your questions. The webinar will probably take about 90 minutes, so I hope you'll be able to stick around for the duration. Now let me introduce you to the panel members, and I think we have a really fantastic group of people here tonight, as we always do. 3 of them are former Cal State Fullerton students or history majors, and I'm very happy to say that we have a senior recruiter with us tonight who is up at midnight in Washington, D.C., who will be working tonight from midnight to 1:30 a.m. to talk to you about careers in federal government. Carlos Del Toro, how about you introduce yourself first?
Hello, good evening. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Awesome. Well, welcome everyone. My name is Carlos Del Toro, and I'm very, very happy to be here with you this evening. I work with the U.S. Office of Personnel Management in Washington, D.C., and I am a senior federal recruitment advisor, as Professor Jensen mentioned. I have a BS in economics with a concentration in management administration from City College of New York, or CUNY, and I live in the D.C. area. I've been here since about 2009, and I could share more with you a little bit later.
Okay, fantastic. Jay, tell us about yourself.
Hi, my name's Jay Butine. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
I am a graduate from Cal State Fullerton. I got my undergrad in history in 2008, and I got my master's in history in 2013. I currently work for the Department of Justice in San Francisco, and a small part of the Department of Justice called the Antitrust Division. And prior to that, I worked for the National Archives for a year.
Okay, thank you, thank you, Jay. Wonderful. Christopher, introduce yourself, please. Thank you.
Hi, can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so my name is Christopher Lorenz. I'm a special agent with the Homeland Security Investigations with the Department of Homeland Security, and I've worked in the government for 22 years, either in the military or in the federal government.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you, Christopher. Victor, last but not least, introduce yourselves to us.
Hi, everyone. Good evening. My name is Victor Velasco. Happy to be here. I am a Customs and Border Protection Officer out in San Diego field office. Prior to that, I graduated from Cal State Fullerton with a history degree in 2008. Me and Jay were classmates. Prior to that, I used to work with Bank of America for 3 years, and I have 17 years of total military service, 6 in active duty, and the rest in reserves.
Okay, thank you. I think there's a nice combination here of long years of experience accumulated with all the participants, but also I think still a closeness to recent graduation that will allow you guys to speak a little bit about sort of your more recent experience of getting into the job. And I think our students will appreciate that in particular. I want to now ask you all to speak a little bit about what you do specifically. I mean, you've said you described your position, you've said where you work, but really, what is it that you do in your day-to-day life, and how good is this really? Do you like your job? I'm going to go the other way around now. Victor, what's your daily routine? What do you do, and what do you like about it?
Well, with my job, it comes and goes every day, but for the most part, I work a night shift from 2 o'clock to 10 o'clock in the evening. And basically what my job entails is I determine admissibility for every person coming into the United States. So in particular, I work in the San Ysidro border crossing, which is about 10 minutes away from San Diego. And it's considered one of the most busiest border crossing in the world because you have a Tijuana and San Diego metropolitan area. So as you can imagine, I determine admissibility for everyone that comes into the United States, whether it be vehicles or pedestrian. I determine their immigration status as well as any enforced custom law. The biggest thing that thrives in this area is mainly illegal immigration and also individuals trying to transport narcotics into the United States. So every day is a different adventure. Currently, as of right now, I work immigration cases, and currently, I don't know if anyone's been keeping with current events with the whole immigration battle in the political forefront. We're dealing with a lot of asylum cases coming from different parts of the country, whether it be Syria, Afghanistan, Pakistan, African countries. Mexico's a big one right now because of due to the violence in certain parts of Mexico. So basically what I also help do is do interviews and set up for any notice to appearances to immigration judge or expedited removals or essentially just deport individuals back. So that's what I do. Every day is a different challenge. The most challenging part about my job is time management. I do work a lot of overtime, and also trying to keep up with the social life. And if you want to do if you want to pursue a master's or study for anything else, time management is very crucial. But I do like my job. It's very challenging. It's a national security position, so it's a very challenging job as well.
Victor, I have two questions, if I may ask them. One is, if you work from 2 to 10, and I understand you're currently pursuing your master's, correct? Do you have a social life at all?
It's a delicate balance. I try to at least set aside a couple hours, whether it be spend time with my significant other or try to catch up with colleagues as well. So I dedicate at least 2 or 3 hours, I say probably within a 2-week time span, because then you also have your home obligations, getting haircuts, grocery shopping, paying bills. So it's very challenging. So it's one of those things that you have to sacrifice, and I remember that back in my undergrad days that I had to sacrifice a lot of personal time with friends. So time management is always a challenge for my job.
The other question I have is, I've had some experience myself as an immigrant um, with the Department of Homeland Security. So would you be the person who would greet me at the port of entry, or would you be the person who reviews my application for permanent residence?
I would be the individual that would greet you. So if you would
Okay.
fly into, say, Los Angeles International Airport, we do have customs officers there as well. If you're crossing from Tijuana into the United States, then I would be the
Hmm.
officer inspecting you, determining admissibility, and everything that I just mentioned before.
You know, I remember almost every Border Patrol agent that I've ever met at LA Airport has told me how much they like history. So maybe you have some colleagues who I met at some point in my life. Anyway, I'm going to move on to Chris. Chris, tell us a little bit about what you do specifically in your job and what you like about it.
Well, first, I'm going to say that my job actually goes hand in hand with Victor's. I work for Homeland Security Investigations, which is the investigative arm of Homeland Security. So when Border Patrol agents or Customs and Border Protection officers or TSA agents or federal air marshals come into contact with what we call a major crime, so if it's more of a minor violation, they're going to handle it themselves. If it's a major crime that involves multiple jurisdictions, or it looks like it's going to turn into a long-term investigation, then they would call Homeland Security Investigations, someone like myself, and then we would take that and we would open a federal case on that lead, and we would start conducting a long-term investigation. So we're like the detectives of the Department of Homeland Security. As far as the job, maybe I've seen you because I worked for a year at LAX with Homeland Security, so I've seen many people coming through those gates.
Yeah.
Currently, I'm a human trafficking investigator. I work assigned. My actual group that I work with is both child exploitation and human trafficking, but I specifically do human trafficking in that group. And basically, we are again looking at multi-jurisdictional, international, or very large human trafficking networks to investigate. So, it's not something that, we would always do where, human trafficking involves both labor trafficking and sex trafficking. So it's not like we're going to go out and arrest, one or two prostitutes or one or two pimps. My job is, on the federal level to investigate large-scale, operations where they're, bringing people to work in the sex trade or forced labor like migrants on farms or in factories, and they're moving them from state to state to hide them from law enforcement. They're using money laundering methods to hide their ill-gotten gains, and they're bringing people from other countries in to exploit them. So that's basically what my job is currently.
That sounds incredibly important. That sounds incredibly important, but also stressful. I could imagine you coming across some dramatic cases and some tragic cases too.
What's really sad is I used to work narcotics, like Victor said. I did customs enforcement and narcotics investigations and money laundering, and that was a lot easier to deal with than I just started doing the human trafficking and child exploitation investigations about 6 months ago, and it is extremely difficult. And what is so sad is I work out of Orange County, where Cal State Fullerton is, and if you can imagine, we are arresting at least one person every single week nonstop for child exploitation, and that's just at the federal level.
Wow. But
So,
you like your job nonetheless.
I would say that this is one of the greatest jobs in the world. I've done a lot of jobs, but working as a special agent for the federal government, I'm not having to wear a uniform all the time like I do in the military. I don't have to spend every single day at the office. I can get out in the world. I'm talking to people. I'm doing a lot of research, and it's never boring. I could go one day and be doing a protection detail for witnesses in trials, or people who are informants and they've had their lives threatened, or law enforcement officers that have their lives threatened, to the next day doing an undercover operation, to testifying in court. There's just so many things. Every single day brings something different, and I never work. I would say at least once a week I'm not in the office and I'm in some place I've never been before, whether it's in a different county or a different state or even a different country. Doing these investigations every single week brings something completely different.
That sounds really intriguing. I'm going to move on. Chris and Victor, you both have the chance later on to talk a little bit more about how you got into these positions. But now I want to turn to Jay and want to hear a little more about your day-to-day work.
Yeah, so I work for the Department of Justice Antitrust Division in San Francisco as a paralegal. And generally what the Antitrust Division does is investigates and enforces the country's antitrust laws. So when companies fix prices or rig bids and do things of that nature, our agency investigates those crimes and prosecutes those crimes. And then we also do some merger reviews. So when companies want to merge, our office will review the merger and decide whether we want to sue to block it. So translating that to on a daily basis, I usually get into work. It's a normal 9 to 5 or 8 to 5 job. I come in, I deal with a lot of evidence. I log a lot of evidence that comes in. I review it, looking for evidence of whatever crime we're investigating. Sometimes I help prepare subpoenas, prepare for search warrant applications. And then when we do have a trial, I assist attorneys in preparing exhibit lists, presenting exhibits in the courtroom, and just a kind of a lot of different sort of legal tasks. And that's sort of the day-to-day for me.
When I hear Antitrust Division, I'm an economic historian. I'm immediately intrigued. I find this fascinating. Other history students that are listening may find this the most tedious bureaucracy they could imagine. Which of the two is it?
I think as a historian, it's actually very interesting because the crimes we investigate are be very document intensive. So I spend a lot of my days reading through emails of corporate officers looking for evidence of agreements. So you'll be reading their emails looking for code words or different references. So you spend a lot of time as a historian looking at documents and trying to figure out what those documents show. And I tend to do a lot of that in my job currently. So I found that aspect to be very interesting.
I wonder, you are based in San Francisco. Can you afford living in San Francisco?
Just barely, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I actually live in, I live in the East Bay in Oakland, which when I first moved here I'd say at the end of 2012 was much cheaper, but now Oakland is about as expensive as San Francisco now.
Last but not least, I'm going to turn to Carlos, who maybe can tell us a little about what sort of are the general appeals of working for the federal government, working in a federal agency, rather than sort of describing a specific experience. Carlos.
Yes. Are you asking, Professor, about what people can look forward to in the federal government, or my specific experience?
I think while your experience is interesting, I think you have the knowledge to speak maybe more generally to what really is the appeal, what is the benefit of working in a federal agency in the federal government.
Well, with regard to the federal government, we, OPM, the U.S. Office of Personnel Management, we represent the entire federal government in terms of helping you to find and apply for federal jobs throughout the federal government. We're talking agencies across the board, anything you could think of with every conceivable mission area, Department of Agriculture, Justice, Department of Homeland Security, you name it, we have it in the federal government. So all the majors that anyone can think of would be represented, including history majors, of course. And in terms of the types of jobs that you would do, it runs the gamut from everything from from entry-level professional positions to high-level executive positions in every conceivable area. And I'm really not exaggerating with that. There's really, the sky's the limit in terms of what you could do in the federal government.
Mm-hmm. If you try to recruit people to work in the federal government and they have job parallels in the private sector, what would you say is the benefit of working in the public sector, or more specifically for the federal government, rather than say do a similar to a similar job, pursue a similar career elsewhere?
Well, everyone is looking for the same types of skill sets, but I really believe that in the federal government, simply because of economies of scale, there are certain things that we can do over and beyond what you might be able to do in the private sector. For example, let's say someone was looking to do federal air traffic control. Well, only FAA does that, so that's something that we can do like no other. In law enforcement, you think of agencies like FBI, Homeland Security, the agencies that we're hearing represented here today. The kind of mission areas that we have on a federal level will allow you to put your skills to use in a way that that's going to be much more broad, and you're going to have resources that are available to you that you're not going to be able to have, let's say, in the private sector, in private companies for security, or in local law enforcement, or the like. So you're definitely going to have resources available to you, and the scope and breadth of duties that you can perform in a way that that you're not going to see anywhere else.
Mm-hmm. How did you get into your job?
I got. Sure. Yeah, I received my BS in economics from City College, but my concentration was in management and administration, and I knew individuals in Washington D.C. I was in New York, of course, but I knew individuals in Washington D.C. Who were already in the federal government, and they encouraged me to look into civil service. Quite frankly, it's not something that I had thought of initially, but with my background in economics, I believe that there were several agencies where I could put that knowledge to use. But as it turned out, I was approached by someone in the human resources area because with my degree, I was able to qualify for things other than economics. And particularly with the management administration background, it was pretty versatile, so I could use it in other areas. And it seemed especially suited to the HR work that they were doing at the time, specifically in staffing and classification. And I began working for USDA, and I just decided to stay with HR. And it's funny, the week that I accepted a job in HR, I was actually offered something in economics, but I decided to stick with HR, and the rest is history.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Okay. Go ahead.
No, go ahead, Professor, I'm good.
Oh, okay. I'm sure that there will be questions for you specifically later on, but for now, I want to hear a little bit more about how everybody else got into their particular position. And I asked this specifically because both Victor and Chris have emphasized their military background, and I would like to hear a little bit more about the different kind of jobs that you did that got you to where you are today, and then maybe at the end hear from Carlos how important this military background is, because I could see a lot of our students may be wondering, well, I would love to be a special agent one day, but I have no military background, so I don't think this will happen for me. So I want that question addressed in this round. I'm going to go with Jay first. Jay, what got you into the Antitrust Division?
Well, I guess generally what got me into the Antitrust Division is I was considering going to law school, but I didn't want to make that decision before I had some exposure to a legal environment. So I was applying to paralegal positions left and right, and I had a neighbor who suggested that I apply for a paralegal job in another federal agency, which didn't work out, but that led me to find this job in San Francisco. And I applied and never thought I would get it, and then I ended up landing it. And that's sort of the high level version of what got this job specifically.
Now, when you were a history major, correct?
That's correct.
And you probably had, is that why you had little confidence that you would get the job, because you're a history major?
No, I think I didn't have much confidence because a lot of paralegal positions they require either required a paralegal certificate or a
Mm-hmm.
certain number of years of experience as already being a paralegal, and I think that just reflected the job market in California generally. So I
Mm-hmm.
was just having a hard time finding a foot in the door. Luckily,
Mm-hmm.
the position I'm in now, they didn't require prior experience. Uh,
Mm-hmm. Did you hope that history somehow would be of use in the job?
Yeah, I did. You look at a lot of different paralegal postings, and you'll see like different skill sets that law offices or agencies are looking for. And this agency in particular was looking for people who could research, people who could write, take notes,
Mm-hmm.
you know, be able to sort of think on their feet and do some editing. And I figured I had a better shot at this job than other jobs just because of my background as a historian. Like they were looking for people who could edit well, and I was on the Wallabian when I was in
Mm-hmm.
graduate school, so I think that helped a lot.
Mm-hmm. I'm explaining for Carlos here. The Willabethan is a student history journal that Cal State Fullerton has um, put out for over 30 years now, and I think we've won national awards for this journal for almost every year that it's been put out. Our master students are very active as writers and editors. Um, Chris, now you said you've been working in federal agencies and with the federal government for about 22 years now. Um, that makes me think that you probably were in the military even before you got to Cal State Fullerton. Is that correct?
Yes, so I joined the military when I was 17, and I spent about half my career in the Army, and then I've spent the second half of my career in the Coast Guard, which I'm currently in the Coast Guard Reserves right now. I think importantly, I think Carlos could, well, he would probably echo this, is there's many different paths into the federal government. So I've worked for 4 different federal agencies as a civilian, and I've worked at the federal government pre-bachelor's degree and
Mm-hmm.
post-bachelor's degree. And
Mm-hmm.
I think that it's important to know that you don't have to have military experience to get in. There's many different ways to prepare yourself or to qualify for these jobs. I would
Mm-hmm.
say, as far as my job is concerned, although it is possible to get my job without a bachelor's degree, it is highly improbable.
Mm-hmm.
Um, there are ways that you can get that experience, but it is almost mandatory to have a bachelor's degree in my field,
Mm-hmm.
and it's beneficial because in my profession as a special agent, we are paid more on average, I think, than most other federal law enforcement officers due to the requirement of the bachelor's degree
Mm-hmm.
and possibly some other experience.
Now, you were already in the military. Why did you then choose the history major?
Well, as far as that goes, I've loved history my entire life, and so I knew, even from being a kid in grade school, that history was going to be the major that I chose. I figured that there is not a field of human endeavor that does not get categorized historically at some point. So
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't matter if it's math or economics or just politics. Everything boils down to history at some point. So I knew that that's
Mm-hmm.
the direction that I would like to go, and I focused on like U.S. government and American history. So
Mm-hmm.
that kind of helped me go make a smooth transition into law enforcement. However, when I was in school, I was actually working to be a teacher, and I'm qualified and have all the prerequisites to be a K through 12 teacher, but I just didn't take that path. I ended up getting into law enforcement.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So you were never worried that you wouldn't get a job as a history major?
No, I thought that my job would revolve around history in some way,
Mm-hmm.
and although my job currently does not revolve around history, the skills that I learned, studying history and the research skills and writing skills, go into my report writing and interviewing and gathering information from suspects and witnesses and victims every day.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I mean, basically, we're just asking them to recount the history of what happened.
Yeah, this is someone put this bug in my head. That was Professor Carthrop. He, and many of you know him. He at some point said, "What we do in history is learn how to tell a story, and how to put a story together." And I think putting a story together is. And story may sound fanciful, like it's something fictional, but it's an account, it's a narrative of what happened. And I think in all the jobs that we are learning about here today, that's really crucial, the ability to put a story together. Victor, what made you a history major?
My path was a little bit different. While I was in the military initially, I wanted to become a doctor, and I wanted to major in biology and biochemistry. So while in the military and active duty, I had to take some general ed courses, and at the time when I was stationed in Oklahoma, I took a history course, and it was U.S. history. And from there on, I really liked the teacher, how he presented the material, the U.S. history. I did learn in high school, but as you well know, when you're young, you're pretty much not all focused there, and that was my situation at the time when I was in high school. But while I was in community college, it really did intrigue me, and right away I fell in love, and I made the decision, from here on out, this is what I'm going to major in history, because I know you speak to a lot of people here, unfortunately, in the United States, and they have no clue or don't have any basic facts or even the general time frame of certain historical events. And so that led me to further my passion and to really cement my decision to major in history. So when I got out of the military, I separated from active duty into the reserves. I right away knew that going into Cal State Fullerton, I'm going to major in history, and I felt that I could apply that skills from here on out, regardless of what path I choose in my career.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Um, Now, you all entered careers at different times. Although I think Jay and Victor, you said you were classmates, right?
Yes, we were.
And you got into the job market in 2008, 2009. That was not a good time to enter, was it? Did you feel that at the time?
Well, as for me, it was at the time I was exploring going into law school. I really wanted to go into law school and become an attorney. And when the market crashed and I was applying for various positions in the Los Angeles area for paralegal, just like Jay mentioned earlier, a lot of law firms were looking for experiences, and unfortunately for me, I did not have that paralegal experience. And so at that time in my life, not making enough money as a student, I really wanted a job. I needed a job. So fortunately for me in the reserves, about November 2008 to be precise, I was hired as a human resource manager for the Department of the Air Force out in March Air Force Base. And I held that position for 5 years until I transferred over to the Department of Homeland Security. So during that time, the timing was crucial for me because of the job market and how the economy was just really shaky at the time. And so I was kind of I was uneasy because of the job market as well. So
Mm-hmm.
for me, I will admit, I'm not ashamed to say it, I was very fortunate to land a job within the federal government during
Mm-hmm.
that time frame.
Mm-hmm. Jay, was that a factor for you, that a federal government position might suggest a little more security? Were you worried at the time?
Well, when I graduated in 2008, I suppose I should have mentioned this earlier. I was in the military too. I was in the Marine Corps Reserves,
Oh,
and
okay.
I graduated in 2008, and then my unit was activated and we deployed to Iraq in 2009. So I didn't have a lot of downtime after I graduated, and I was on
Mm-hmm.
active duty, so I had a job, and I was deployed. And when I got back, I decided to go to grad school. So I was sort of able to wait out the recession for the most part. But even when I was applying to jobs in 2011, 2012, it was still very difficult. And the federal government was attractive to me, like you said, because there's a little more security in it, and also the having a veterans preference definitely helps get your foot in the door.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Carlos, I want to ask you a couple of questions here. The first one is one that has come up already in the contributions and also in the chat. Is the federal government a sort of generally stable employer compared to the private sector, or is this a wrong impression?
No, I don't think it's the wrong impression at all. I think it's quite stable. The competition is pretty fierce for government jobs, and that's one of the reasons why I think people understand that the federal government is here to stay. And as long as there is as long as the budgets will support positions, and as long as people perform well in their jobs, of course they have to perform at great levels, then there's very good stability with federal jobs. And you really want to look at federal jobs in terms of for the long term, and that's always going to be the case. And as far as I've been involved with the federal government, I've seen that.
Mm-hmm. So when we hear Republican strategists promise that they want to make federal government so small they can drown it in the bathtub, that's not going to happen, is it?
I don't believe so. I mean, you're always going to have the political talk. Remember that's one of the benefits of civil service in particular. That's one thing I guess I should make clear, that when you talk about jobs in the federal government, you're really talking about different types of jobs. The things, for example, that you'll see on USA Jobs are all in what's called the competitive civil service, which means that you are under that what's called the merit system, and that is something that is very, very stable. Now, if you're working outside of the competitive civil service, without getting into too much detail, you have what's known as the accepted service, and what determines whether something is in the competitive or the accepted service is not necessarily cut and dry, but you'll see a lot of, for example, law enforcement positions or positions in the intelligence community outside of the competitive civil service system. And of course, all your political types of positions are going to be outside of that completely. So in terms of stability, obviously in a political environment, you're going to have a lot more jobs that are considered to be at will as compared to something in the competitive civil service. So but the political stuff, definitely there's going to be some instability there. Obviously, it's going to move with the times with regard to politics, but anything within a competitive civil service career, civil service is going to be fairly stable.
And I think you very quickly mentioned a website here, USA Jobs.
Correct.
That is the place where we can look for civil service jobs.
That is the place that you would look for civil service jobs. And then if you want to find other federal jobs that are not within the competitive civil service, you would want to go directly to the agency websites, to their career or employment sections. And some agencies will be completely outside of the civil service. So for example, CIA, if you want to find a CIA job, you will not find one on USA Jobs. You'll go directly to the CIA site and you'll find their system for hiring based on what they do in the accepted service. Some agencies, it's going to be a mix. For example, Department of State, things in the diplomatic service you're going to have that are outside of the competitive civil service, but anything within Department of State that is considered competitive civil service, that will redirect you to USA Jobs.
And I want to point out to the participants that our Cal State Fullerton Career Center has a very close working relationship with the local recruiter for the CIA. They were originally supposed to be participants in this webinar, but as CIA employees, they're not allowed to be recorded and then later available online. And so for that reason, we don't have them participating today. I wanted to bring up a question that came up in the chat room that also sort of picked up on the joke I made about the politics of it. Do you, Carlos, think that the election results might in some way change hiring patterns in the federal government here? In this particular case, Lindsay is looking for a job in the Department of State on the domestic side, and she wonders whether changing foreign policy priorities may change the demand for those positions. Is that a concern to keep in mind, or does that not really matter?
It's difficult to say. To be quite honest, I'm not really an expert in the political side of things, but you're always going to have you're going to always have people talking about making government smaller. A few years back, that was about the most I've seen it, and it did cut back on hiring considerably. I'm talking around between 2008 and around 2011, but you're always going to have key mission critical occupations that are going to be filled regardless. And in the on the accepted service side, you're always going to have the specialists who can do that job. So I wouldn't think it's a major consideration.
Mm-hmm. When threats appear about funding the federal government, and indeed the government is shut down, how significant a risk factor is that for federal employees?
In recent years, it's been more of a concern, I think. But even as bad as it's gotten on the political spectrum, we've still come out okay. So I wouldn't consider it a major thing. You're always that's something that's inherent in federal work, and quite frankly, in any kind of government system. I work for state government as well. The state goes through the same kind of thing. You're always going to have, budgets that are going to be in peril. You're going to have the politics, and you're going to have hiring, folks talking about cutting back on hiring. It's going to be rising and falling with the times, and you just have to be ready to weather the storm. But I wouldn't make it a major consideration. For example, if that's going to be the deciding factor for someone to apply or not apply, I would say err on the side of applying.
Yeah, especially given the general stability that you would have compared to a private sector job. Now, it appears that being a veteran is a pretty good advantage. Is that true from your perspective too, Carlos?
Well, let me first say that I agree completely with Chris, what he said earlier, and can confirm what he said, that a military background it can help because the skill sets that you gain are conducive, to many of the jobs that you'll find on the civilian side. However, as he said, military experience certainly is not a prerequisite. The fact is that every job in the federal government has specific qualifications, and as long as you have the education and or experience, sometimes it's a combination, as long as you have that to meet the qualifications, that's completely independent of the need for military experience. In fact, I would say broad skills, such as the ability to write well, think analytically, communicate orally, those are going to be key in addition to the qualifications for the job. But I do believe that if you are a veteran, there are certain advantages. So, for example, we mentioned earlier veterans preference. Well, for when you're evaluating applicants and you're assessing them, and you're putting them in the later part of the hiring process into what are known as categories. Someone who is a veteran is going to get additional points, and they're going to move up within those individual categories. And if you're a disabled veteran, someone brought that up in the chat, if you're a disabled veteran, you're going to move up even further. So it's definitely an advantage if you meet the definition of veteran for hiring purposes. Not only with regard to veterans preference that I'm describing here in a very broad way, but also there are specific hiring authorities. All hiring in the federal government is done on the basis of a specific hiring authority, and there are certain special ones that particularly veterans can avail themselves of, so that they can have a bit of an edge in terms of getting into the federal government. Just to give you one quick example, a veteran who is disabled, who is deemed by Department of Veterans Affairs to be at 30% or more in terms of their disability, there is a special hiring authority specifically for 30% or more disabled veterans. So it can be an advantage.
So John, you asked that question. I think you got a pretty good answer here. If you want to review this, remember that like all the other webinars, this one is being recorded. Carlos, I wanted to follow up on another aspect that fits well in here. History majors, they often have a hard time, I think, I'm guessing here, imagining themselves or describing the career plans effectively, and emphasizing really what makes them strong. In your experience, what makes history majors such good employees?
Well, in my opinion, history majors are excellent researchers, and that's something that's always going to help with regard to many federal positions. History majors also are very analytical in their thinking, very methodical. Analysis, as I mentioned earlier, analysis is something that I cannot emphasize enough. Writing skills, oh my goodness. I mean, if, for any federal job, you really want to have excellent writing skills. And matter of fact, when you look at all the qualifications and you look at the postings, you're going to find also what are known as knowledge, skills, and abilities. And basically, knowledge, skills, and abilities are, you must possess these knowledge, skills, and abilities in order to perform the job as of day one. And oftentimes, you're going to see one of the skills or abilities that are described in terms of writing skills or communicating orally. And those are all things that I believe history majors have a strong leg up on.
Despite all technological changes, writing has not disappeared from the job, has it?
Oh, not at all. Not at all.
It probably has only become more important. It appears we sort of jumped into a question round, so I want to handle some of these, and maybe we'll review a couple of those, the other questions later. Alexander asked, to what extent his interest in immigration studies can sort of turn into a job with the Department of Homeland Security. And I don't know, is that an easy transfer there, Victor? Do you see people who work with the Border Patrol who actually sort of have an historical view on immigration?
It's hard to say because most of my colleagues either completing their bachelor's or do not have their bachelor's at all, or some do have bachelor's but they don't have a history background. I guess the main important thing, and I'll be biased since I'm a history major, what has helped me out a lot in regards to immigration law is basically, maybe Chris can piggyback on this. Immigration law, in my opinion, is like the second most complicated law to understand aside from tax law. So the skills that you learn in history, research, reading, writing, getting the conclusion, analyzing the whole certain passages and stuff, that would definitely help you out with immigration because each case is different. So with that, in respects to Alexander's question, I think with the bachelor's and more so with the master's degree, with the additional skills in reading and writing and analyzing, it would definitely prepare you to understand immigration and applying it to certain cases, because one individual will be adjudicated or processed a certain manner within the confines of the immigration law, as opposed to, say, someone else. And one of the most common questions that I get asked in my job every day is, well, officer, such and such, so and so happened on this day, but when will this be rectified? And the common answer that I give everybody is each case is different. You have to consider what happened, what led to that, what other implications occur that an immigration law or a particular section of immigration law would be applicable to that position. So looking at the question what Alexander wrote in regards to INS and USCIS, before I was hired on Homeland Security and Customs and Border Protection, I was actually offered a job with USCIS in downtown Los Angeles. So I turned it down, being a typical man, and decided to go with the badge and the gun instead of being behind an office. But it is also beneficial because a lot of my colleagues have left my current position and have gone to USCIS because of that immigration background, because we deal with the immigration enforcement and we deal with a lot of different types of cases on a daily basis, especially in an area of San Diego. So my suggestion to you is, if you really are interested in doing that, definitely keep a lookout for any INS positions or USCIS positions, or also consider in the law enforcement route, such as Customs and Border Protection or even Homeland Security investigations, like Chris. There's a lot of jobs open, especially with immigration being a hot button issue in the political spectrum. So definitely use your advantage of your degree and try to get into a position and use that job as a means to an end to definitely where you want to get at. So that's the best advice that I could give Alexander.
Thank you. I'm going to go to another area of discussion, and some of the questions have pointed to that already. The work environment. I think Alexander's interest in sort of understanding immigration from the inside of the INS or USCIS makes me wonder, how many colleagues do you have that appreciate history the way you do? Do you work with a lot of history majors around you? Chris, I'm going to take you first. Are you an anomaly amongst your colleagues?
I would say that I am an anomaly at this point. I just met Victor online here, and I guess it's just us, because the one thing I would say is that any degree will get you into the federal government or the military. So that's the unique thing about the government on the federal side, military or civilian. Any bachelor's degree will do. So while I have a history degree, many of my colleagues, I would say the majority of my colleagues, have criminal justice, criminology or sociology or psychology degrees. A few have law degrees, but it's more in that realm. So definitely, I would say the sociology field, but history is not as many people. There's just a few. Although I think that the history degree prepares you just as well as any of those other degrees for our particular position. Mm-hmm. And I totally echo Victor as far as getting a job. There's so many jobs in the Department of Homeland Security that have cross jurisdictions and kind of mutually compatible missions, like CBP, Border Patrol, ICE, HSI, and CIS. These are all acronyms, but if you study up on USA Jobs and see what each of those things is, you'll see that they all have they basically cross-pollinate, and so it just goes on a scale from whether you want to carry a gun and do enforcing of laws, to do more research and write reports and propose actions or procedural changes. It just depends on which agency you're at, what you'll be doing, and the scale goes from one side to the other, in which you could use that immigration knowledge or history knowledge. It just depends, but it's wide open.
Mm-hmm. Jay, are you an outsider as a history major, or do you have other colleagues who have a similar background?
I've had a few colleagues who had history backgrounds, at least on the paralegal side. When it comes to the attorneys, all they talk about is where they went to law school, and I assume some of them are history majors. But mostly it's history and other soft sciences like political science, political economy, and maybe a couple economics majors. So I wouldn't say it's the norm, but it's not out of the ordinary.
There are a couple of questions that relate to, I think, location. Jay found a job in San Francisco. Victor is in San Diego. Chris, I believe you're in Anaheim?
My office is in Santa Ana, and I live in Riverside.
Right. So you are in Santa Ana. Carlos, if someone here in Fullerton wants a job in D.C., are they second behind someone who lives closer to DC or in DC? Is that at all a factor?
Not necessarily. The reason for that is because all federal positions that are advertised to folks who have never been in the federal government is open to all U.S. citizens, and that's from anywhere in the nation. And agencies understand that. They understand that people can be coming from anywhere. It's interesting that a lot of folks, they will say to me, as far as working for the federal government, they say, well, I don't really want to work in D.C. And I say to them, well, the interesting thing is, I asked them, where do you think most jobs are? And they say, well, in D.C. And I'd say no, and in point of fact, maybe around 30% of the jobs are in DC and about 70% are actually throughout the country. But if you do want to work in DC, that's certainly a possibility. And in fact, in today's climate, you can even do an interview over the phone. You wouldn't even have to necessarily go into DC to do that. Agencies understand that people are coming from different places. So I've seen situations where folks will interview over the phone for a job in DC, and then their relocation expenses, for example, would probably not be paid. But if they accept the job, then they can then arrange that on their own. Another thing that helps these days is telework. Back in 2010, the federal government really strengthened laws with regard to telework in the federal government. So while it is not widespread at the moment, it is possible as well, if your job allows that, it is possible to even come up with a telework arrangement where you could conceivably work in one location across the country via telework, and that would be your official duty station. Now, I don't want to make that sound like that's the norm. It really isn't. It's becoming more of an option these days, but there's a lot of flexibility is my ultimate point here.
I had a question about jobs in foreign affairs, and I assume that would mean positions with the State Department overseas. I will tell you that we have an alumnus who is an analyst with the State Department overseas and who was also supposed to be in this webinar, but he is actually unable to. Well, he's not allowed right now to be online. I guess you could say he's undercover. I don't think I'm blowing his cover if I say this. Anyway, he has an exciting job as an analyst overseas. Those jobs, I would imagine that going abroad with the State Department may be amongst the most desirable of positions. How easy is it to go overseas with the government colors?
I honestly don't know too much about it, but I do know that there is very heavy competition for those jobs. The State Department has very specific procedures and very specific requirements for the folks who go overseas, and there are medical things that have to be taken care of and other things that need to be taken care of. I would honestly suggest that you contact someone at the State Department to get more specifics.
Okay. Right. Let me take us to some specific skills that we are currently trying to teach our students, and these are our BA goals and our MA goals. And I wonder whether our participants, our panel members, can look at these, and at any time that any of you want to participate, tell me where you think this really actually is something that I do on a regular basis. And maybe you have an example where you can say, you know what, I can tell you right now that just the other day, this particular skill mattered a great deal to me. Because I think what our students need is building the confidence that what they learn is actually a professional skill and a knowledge that really has a use outside the class. And that's something that I think history majors are not as familiar with.
So this is Jay. Earlier you were talking about the ability to tell a story, and when we're getting ready to do a case and do a trial, we use that skill all the time. We are gathering what documents we have and putting them into a logical order and trying to figure out what witnesses are going to stay on the stand to tell a story of what crime occurred and prove that to a bunch of people beyond a reasonable doubt. So that skill is used all the time. So, and there's a lot of sub skills we use in history to do that, is how to think critically, how will this document be used, what can it be used for, what information does it show, and things like that.
So you're actually really reading a document, interpreting a document, and using evidence.
Yeah, I wouldn't say as much interpreting each and every document, but figuring out okay, what documents do we have and how can we use all those to prove all the elements of the crime we're trying to show occurred.
Well, that sounds pretty. Go ahead.
I was going to say, and then also when you're working on a trial, the lawyers are trying to come up with a theme and really tell a story, because that's the way to get the juries interested. There's that proving the elements of the crime and then actually showing what happened. So how a conspiracy began. Did some people meet at dinner one night and then they decided to fix prices, and then they sort of implemented that over time. But just to kind of tell the story to make it make sense to people.
Victor, Chris, do any of these goals sort of jump at you in the way that they sort of matter to your daily work?
For my job, it does a lot. It's the same with Jay said, and also with Chris. You got to recount events. You got to tell a story in a logical form. I know for my job, I have to write a lot of reports because it is subject to subpoena in a court of law. As a matter of fact, I just been subpoenaed for a trial in April, and regarding an arrest I did back last year for an individual that tried to transport 15 keys of methamphetamine. And so since I was the arresting officer and I did the report and I was responsible for the drugs and the evidence and so forth, working with HSI agents like Chris down at the border, I have to write a report. And from the defense attorney perspective, they're going to try to look at holes of or any loopholes or any errors that I might have done in my report writing or the procedures that I might have done in that arrest. So history comes into play in terms of my writing skills. I've been complimented a lot in my job. Considering they call me still a rookie because I've only been in for a couple years. In my reports, I'm very detailed. My interviews, I get straight to the facts. I've been told by a couple of individuals that my line of questioning is I'm interrogating, but the reason for that is because I'm searching for the truth, and you want to stick to the facts. And what I recall in being an undergrad in history, you're looking for facts, you're looking for the truth, so to speak, and then you write it in a logical, coherent form in writing. And so that has helped me a lot in my job. I pointed out some errors that some of my colleagues have made, unfortunately, and just the research skills has really helped me a lot with my current job, and has served me well, and it has enabled me to educate the rest of my colleagues of how to become better individuals and better law enforcement officers.
Oh, fantastic. Carlos, I want to ask you something that I think I asked once before, but the question, or rather the answer, deserves repeating. Where in the federal government do we particularly find a particularly large amount of historians? Where are historians particularly needed?
You might be surprised where they're found. You'll find them in the Department of Defense and specific departments like Department of Army or the Air Force. You'll find them in the Department of Interior. You'll find them in, I'm actually looking through a couple of things at USA Jobs, National Archives and Records Administration, of course, from the archivist point of view. You'll find them in, let's see here, Department of State, in terms of the kind of skills you're talking about. Also, when you're dealing with trade, international trade, agencies that deal with trade, also anything with foreign affairs, maybe USAID, which is a sister agency of Department of State.
And I want to quickly put a plug in. Later this semester, we will have an NGO and charitable work webinar where USAID will be participating. Sorry, back to you, Carlos.
No, that's great. Yep. So that
Can I? This is Chris. I was just going to say that just from my military experience, I know that every single state in the country has a military office that is kind of the link between the state National Guards and the federal government military branches. And every state military office has an office of the state military historian. And every state has a military museum, at least one official one. And so the military is always employing historians for those purposes.
Yes, I think particularly in the Department of Defense and in other offices related to the military, we have a constant need for public historians. And I want to put another plug in here for our previous webinar on public history, where we actually have one of our alumni working with the Department of Defense based out of Hawaii, She flies around the world locating crashed warplanes from World War II and other conflicts. And she has one of the most exciting jobs I've ever heard of with the Department of Defense. So historians are in many places. I think that's a very short version of it. But also, yes, Carlos, please.
Excuse me, if I may also, just remember also that not only within the competitive service, but also those accepted service positions and agencies that I mentioned, throughout the judicial branch, I'm sure you'll also find the need for historians. Just a quick item there.
Yeah, right. I was just going to make the connection to Jay here, who described the way in which history is particularly useful. The skills and knowledge of an historian are particularly useful in legal matters. And you could imagine a lot of branches in the federal government having a need for those. Now, Alison Varzali, a colleague of mine, has very patiently been raising her hand here in the chat, and I wanted to see whether there's any additional questions she wants to ask. Alison, is your microphone working? Do you want to ask a question? Okay, this may be an audio problem, but that's okay. Oh, the question is answered. Wonderful. Very good. Well, I think that takes us then to the next round, where you have another opportunity to share some lessons, some advice. Victor, Chris, Jay, I don't know whether you followed the chat on the right. There is a lot of interest in the issues you have raised. And if you want to give some particular recommendations on how to get started, I think that might be really the best thing to hear here. And Carlos, I know that you have very good tips as well for our students who think they would really like a career in a federal agency, but don't quite know how to get it started. Whoever wants to go first.
Can I? This is Chris.
Yes,
Sorry,
go ahead, Chris.
Okay, so I just wanted to say something very important that I think many of us, Jay, Victor, Carlos, should emphasize federally, at least I know in my career, and I think that we could all acknowledge this. You know, you could have military experience, that's a good thing, or not having military experience, but I think, honestly, the very, very most important thing to getting any job anywhere, but especially in law enforcement or in the government, is who you know. So unless you're applying for a job who is at the lowest possible level and they're hiring, you know, 300 people, where everyone's going to have the same exact, you know, opportunity to get that job, because I know that we've had some people asking about like veterans preference and things like that. I can say I personally have held 4 different positions as a civilian in the federal government, and 2 of those were directly because I knew someone at those agencies. And I would say that, you know, going forward, any types of promotions or any types of transfers, anything that I would get are always going to be positively impacted by all of the connections I've made over the years. So just by having this webinar and the students getting to know the 4 of us, I think is already a good thing for them. And I think we should all just keep that in mind. And I just wanted to mention that.
Carlos, is that true? Is that I believe it's true in most employment situations, but I wonder whether some students are disheartened maybe to hear that, you know, the jobs they can reach for, they really need a personal contact. Well, what do you think, Carlos?
I think I agree with Chris in the sense that you should always be networking to learn about different opportunities. Mm-hmm. But I want to just give a caution here, and I'm sure this is not what Chris means, but you with regard to competitive civil service jobs, it's all based on what's known as the merit system, which means that you are hired based strictly on your ability to do the job. You know, do you meet the knowledge, skills, and abilities to be able to do the job? regardless of who you know. Who you know is not going to get you a competitive civil service job. It's who you know may allow you to know when something is open, and they may communicate with you, but it's always with the intention of you applying and competing. Now, in terms of interacting with potential employers at job fairs and information sessions and calling people to try to get an understanding of what goes on in their agency, I agree 100% that you should be doing that, because you shouldn't be one of the big suggestions that I have is that you should always do your homework on the agencies where you would like to work. Don't be like others that just kind of apply for something based on what's on the job posting, just based on what's on paper. Research the agencies, find out what their pain points are. The federal agencies are always in the news, and you can always pull up their website, you can always pull up their budgets, you can always find out what their pain points are in terms of where they're putting their money, what efforts they're going through for new and innovative programs, and to the extent that you could find out what that agency is doing and how you, with your skills, how you can bring something to the table, that's going to make an impression on folks. So I just want to caution that, with the merit promotion system, you don't have to worry about based on who you know. But you do have to be constantly doing that networking to find out what the opportunities are and to try to make the most of that.
Actually, that's exactly what I meant. I apologize. I misspoke when I said who you know, but that's exactly what I was getting. The point is the more people that you can network with, the more jobs you're going to know about, and the more that people can recommend you for positions even before they come up and people know your name. So that's exactly what I was getting at.
Jay, Victor, any recommendations?
This is Jay. I would say my recommendation is to start early in all things. Start looking what jobs are out there that you might be interested in. If you're going to graduate in May, start looking in the fall, as late as the fall, and start applying as early in the fall as well, because sometimes federal agencies take 6, 7, 8, 9 months, even a year to land the job. So you'll be done and graduated, and agencies understand even if you haven't graduated yet, you'll be graduating soon, so they'll still consider you. And I also say start building your resume soon. Like, even if you don't know what you want to do, there was a lot of great opportunities at Fullerton to get job experience. Like I said, I was on the Wallabeathian. That's a great experience. You get to deal with deadlines, work with an author collaboratively, do some editing. That was all over my resume when I was applying to my entry-level jobs. I did an internship at the National Archives, and I got credit for that in the graduate program. Use that to build my resume. You can be an officer on a number of clubs. At Cal State Fullerton, you get experience, managing the club's budget, directing activities, holding meetings. So, and all of these concrete experiences can be applied to almost any job. And that, I'd say, that's the hardest part about getting your foot in the door, is like, once you start applying, you're like, well, all I have is my degree. Like, what else? And that's it. Like, you can do all these other little things to gain some experience and give yourself a leg up in your job hunt.
Yeah, this is Victor. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, I'm sorry, Victor. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I'm just to add on to that. Jay is absolutely right, as well as everyone else in the panel. Start early. Definitely put your applications in if you want to go to the federal government route. If you're seeking for law enforcement experience, just to get either the immigration background or just to get law enforcement experience, to maybe just transfer to another agency such as DEA, FBI, Homeland Security, or U.S. Marshals. I know they're going to be hiring pretty soon. That's also a good route. I know Customs and Border Protection is always constantly hiring, because we definitely need officers, especially in the southwest border, even to the extent that in certain locations within the United States, they're offering loan repayment programs and a certain percentage additional to their salary. So that's one option. You don't have to stay within my agency for the duration, but use it as a stepping stone, as a means to an end. And as soon as you get the application in, especially for law enforcement side or any other positions within the federal government, it's a big plus. I know from my experience in law enforcement side, I know Chris can attest to this. You got to go through the testing, backgrounds, polygraph, the whole 9 yards, drug tests, and that takes a process. But there's definitely jobs out there if anyone's interested in the law enforcement side and use that as a means to an end to whatever they want to do eventually. But the main goal is just to get your foot in the door, build your contacts, build your network, and then also build your experience for your resume.
I think this is really. Oh, sorry, Carlos. You wanted to say something.
Well, I just wanted to add, with regard to the resume, we are always hearing when you do resume workshops and the like, you're always hearing keep your resume to one page, keep it to one page, never go beyond a page. Well, that's not really the best advice when you're applying for federal jobs. Now, if you're qualifying strictly on the basis of your degree, that's probably okay advice because you're not really going by experience. So a one-pager may be entirely appropriate. But if you're also trying to qualify based on a combination, let's say, of education and experience, you want to make sure that you write enough to be able to let the folks making a determination about your qualifications in the agencies make sure that they understand that you clearly meet the qualifications for that position. And if that takes you 3-4 pages to do it on the resume, then go ahead and do that. And now, don't get me wrong, don't do a 20-page resume. No one wants to see that, right? But if you need 3 or 4 pages, 5 pages to do work on your resume to clearly identify what you've done, and not just what you have done, but also what difference that it has made. In other words, what kind of impact that you had with that experience, then go ahead and take that time. So, for example, don't say, if you're applying for something, and don't say that I just to draw a quick example, that I handled a budget, right? You would say I handled a $3 million budget and I saved my agency $200,000. That's just a quick example, but just give the impact of what you've done.
I want to point out to the listeners here that our Career Center has a lot of experience with helping students build their resumes in terms of writing and formatting the resumes. Of course, what Jay, I think, has pointed out is that building the resume is not a matter of how to pad the text, but to do things that actually deserve to be on the resume. And that's why you should be listening to this, hopefully, ideally, about 2 years before you are graduating, so that you can think about the entry-level jobs, the volunteering opportunities now that allow you to refer to experience beyond your degree. So when it comes to building a resume, this is actually building experiences that can then fit on a resume. The other thing I want to stress again is to understand properly what networking means. Networking doesn't mean schmoozing with people and sort of making yourself known. Networking means actually to have and build professional relationships, work relationships, and work-oriented contacts. I think that is the way that you can actually make networking serve your purpose. Is that fair to say, Carlos?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay, so I think this might be a good time to now turn to the remaining questions that may be out there. We have a pretty engaged crowd tonight, so I hope there may be some questions that we have not yet quite addressed. Maybe there's some new questions coming up. I don't see any typing happening right now, so let me just say for now that I think those of you in the audience that are interested in a career in federal government need to do a whole solid round of online research, first with USA Jobs, where the civil service positions are listed, as Carlos said, but then also specifically with the agencies. And I could imagine that maybe a good way to go about finding the proper agency is to think about what you care about most in your field, what has always sort of engaged you historically. You've heard Chris talk about his work in human trafficking, where he actually makes a difference on issues relating to gender, family, social justice. Jay works in a field where he actually engages in issues that are of historical interest, but also contemporary interest of economic justice, fairness. And Victor, I think, has a very hands-on personal encounter with what it means to be, a land of immigrants. So I think you have real specific historical passions that you can actually translate into a related field of work and career in the government. Now, Lindsay reminded me that she has a particular interest in Iranian diplomacy. So if Lindsay has done a good amount of research and really knows a lot about that field, Carlos, should she go to the State Department website?
I think the State Department website would be entirely appropriate. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think that just for that answer, Victor and Chris, both for CBP and HSI, we have international offices in all the embassies. So besides the State Department, many of these federal law enforcement agencies have employees, both law enforcement and not, that are stationed with the State Department in these other countries. So if you're looking for international assignments, you should definitely don't just look at the State Department, because many different agencies are housed with them at the U.S. embassies abroad.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, definitely. CBP definitely has I guess in some positions I've seen in USA jobs within the agency, attaches for different countries. For example, Belgium. I know there's positions in Abu Dhabi. There is positions throughout the whole world. Just to name a few, Dominican Republic. But they just recently opened up an office in Abu Dhabi, and they take care of a lot of I guess flights and any incoming before they go into the United States. So definitely, what like Chris said, CBP along with HSI, also DEA, if they want to go the support route, support side, they also have a lot of offices throughout the world. So the U.S. has a lot of offices throughout the world where we maintain, I guess, some influence or some relations in some sort of relations with each country. So definitely, Lindsay's really looking into Iranian diplomacy, especially with current events. There is a good chance that she could get she could land a position with her background.
And I'll just back on that if you want to look specifically in those agencies, once you've done your research, if you want to cut to the chase in USA Jobs, when you do an advanced search, you can do two things. You could specify the agency where you'd be interested in finding jobs, and also the location. If you want to leave the location as international, you can do that, and that way you can have the broadest selection possible. So you can refine your search that much. You don't have to just do a broad search. You can refine it by location and also by agency.
This, I think, stresses very quickly. This, I think, emphasizes another benefit of looking for careers in the federal government. That not only do you have the option of maybe being overseas, but that there are also jobs all over the country. I personally find the possibility of working in D.C. fascinating. I would love to work in D.C. Not everybody does, but Jay here has a job in San Francisco, and the possibilities for you guys, the audience here, to maybe move and see something new. If it's not overseas, then somewhere else in the country. I mean, the possibilities are really endless. And if you are in a point in your life where you don't yet have children, and you're not yet married, and you're not yet liable for a home mortgage, and you can move, I would encourage you to be bold and make a move if it drives your future opportunities.
Yeah, and just to add real quick, it's also a foreign language is very, very key. Me knowing Spanish and being very fluent in Spanish for my agency that I receive as a bonus. I have other colleagues that are very fluent in Arabic, Farsi, Pashto, Mandarin. That's very key. So just to let Lizzie know, if you know Farsi or you're starting to learn Farsi, that will definitely get a lot of, in my opinion, I think a lot of eyes will open up to your resume, because those are very hard languages to come by. And I think Chris and Carlos can agree with me that if you know a certain language, especially critical languages such as Farsi or any special interest countries, you'll definitely get a good look at your resume.
Yeah, and just think of the strength that our Cal State Fullerton students have here, because we are such a diverse group of students. There are so many among us who have a second language, and I want to encourage all of you who speak a second language to think of this not just as something curious about you, something of interest, but think of it as an asset that you can use, um, whether it's Spanish or German or any other language. Your second language is a bonus, and you should really try to make that work for you. Okay, let's see. You know, I saw earlier on Joshua asking about whistleblowing, what protections there are. I'm not sure we are in the position to really answer this question, but I did want to. Oh, Carlos, you are in the good, very good. Okay.
I can point you to one specific thing if you want to look a little further into that. The Whistleblower Protection Act of 1989. If you look that up, Whistleblower Protection Act 1989, it's obviously federal law that is meant to protect federal whistleblowers, to keep agencies from taking any kind of retaliatory personnel action because of disclosure of information by that employer and applicant. So, whistleblowers can file complaints that they believe, reasonably evidence a violation of law, rule, or regulation, and they're protected by that. So that's something you can look a little bit more deeply into.
Thank you. Okay, that is something specific. Now, Alison Varzali, my colleague, wonders whether some of you could speak to the ways in which your work in federal government makes your life outside of work better. Victor told us already that it can be challenging to have a social life, especially when you're working a night shift. Chris J., do you feel there are maybe perks, benefits to working in federal government? Is this a job that garners respect, interest, curiosity? Or maybe it's just a matter of having a regulated hourly schedule that gives you the free time that many other jobs don't offer.
I think even though I've been very busy lately and I do tend to work a lot, for the most part, a lot of like federal jobs, especially like if you work in an office, you get a pretty regular schedule. Whereas if you went to the private sector, you might have to work a lot more hours and to meet deadlines. The federal government, you have a pretty good idea of what your day is going to look like on a day-to-day basis. So that's nice to have.
Mm-hmm.
I would say from Jay that would be 90% of the federal government. But if you were going to get into my field as a special agent, it would be just flip it on its head. It would be exactly the opposite. As a special agent, we're mandated to work 50 hours a week at a minimum, and it is literally my wife has described the work as completely random. So every single day, I have no idea if 2 days from now I'm going to be working a midnight shift, or I'm going to go into work one day and let's just put it this way, I have a bag of clothes in my car just because there may be something where I'm investigating it. I start work at 9 in the morning and I don't come home till the next day at 10 o'clock at night, and it's been almost 48 hours of work straight. So it just depends on what what you're looking for. Obviously, an office job in the government is going to be very steady, but that's not what I was looking for. So I get bored very easily. This job will never bore you. It is completely different all the time. So, I can't imagine anyone getting bored doing this job. But I manage, I actually have 8 children, and I'm in the military reserves, and I do this job. So, I think Victor hit the nail on the head. It is all about time management. And the good thing about the military and the federal government is you kind of, get out of it what you put in. So, if you're looking for promotions or you're looking for advanced education where the government's going to pay for your master's degree or your PhD or something, those opportunities are out there, but it is all incumbent upon you to reach out and grab those opportunities and to apply to those different opportunities and to make that career happen for you.
And this is Victor. I'm sorry, Miss. Just to add on to what I mentioned earlier and what my other colleagues in the panel have said, in terms of the respect factor, it's hit or miss with my job as well. You have some individuals that really despise you, that really don't like what you stand for because of what's going on in politics and the laws you have to enforce. But on the other side, you have individuals who really do respect what you do and understand the importance of the job, the importance that you're putting your life on the line, the importance of just how of a hot button political issue it affects your job. So there's that aspect. Along with Chris, just last night I just worked a 16-hour shift. I went into work at 6. I got off for work at 10 because there was just a lot of cases that needed to be handled. So every day is different. It's challenging. It's rewarding. It's just mainly what you really want to get out of it. The biggest thing, like I have to keep emphasizing here, is it's a means to an end. So just use it as an experience to get to eventually where you want to get at.
I think that's maybe another point to stress, and maybe Carlos can confirm this, that if you are in the civil service or if you are in a federal agency, there are opportunities to advance significantly. Is that correct, Carlos?
That's definitely the case. As a matter of fact, when you are applying, let's say, for an entry-level position, don't look just at the pay scale at which you're applying for the job, but also look at what's called a promotion potential, and you'll see that clearly outlined in the federal posting. It's the promotion potential. Let's say, give you for an example, let's say that the promotion potential is to 13, and let's say that they're hiring at the GS7. Let's say, well, if you get hired at the 7, what that means essentially is that for the next several years, you could be promoted without further competition until you reach that career ladder, until you reach that promotion potential, because that's what's known as a career ladder. So within 4 or 5 years, you can be at a much higher level without having had to compete with everyone else again. So that's definitely a possibility. And I'll just add very quickly also, I want to agree that much will depend on the particular agency where you work and also the type of work that you're doing. For example, something like the federal government recognizes that you have a life outside of the job, right? But it's going to really depend on how much you're going to be on call during the job. If you have the type of job that was being described earlier, or if you're doing office work, if you something like telework, for example, that I mentioned earlier, it's not suitable for everyone, right? Because some people, you're dealing with national security information, or you're dealing with certain types of things where you have to be physically present on the job. So, but even in a case like that, there may be elements of that job, portions of it, that might allow you to do telework. So even though you might not be doing it all the time, you might be doing it for report writing or some of the administrative work that goes into that. So it really will depend on the type of work that you have.
Mm-hmm. I think that may be a great concluding observation. We are running out of time, and I would hate to have our audience feel bad for leaving early, so I think we should maybe make an effort here to wrap it up. Are there any crucial observations that we sort of missed so far? Chris, Jay, Victor, Carlos, if there's anything else that absolutely has to be said, now is the time.
Jay, I would say if you're looking for a career in the federal government and that's what you want to do, I'm not discouraging people from aiming high and looking for jobs that are reaching for the stars, but don't be afraid to go for a lower level position, get your foot in the door, because you'll start gaining experience, and then you can apply for jobs further up the ladder later on.
Mm-hmm. I think that's absolutely important, that you need to understand that even with a BA or an MA, you may start low and then work your way up, and Carlos has described the many ways in which that will happen.
And I'll just piggyback on that just to say that one thing too is once you get your foot in the federal government, remember that a position in one state is as good as a position in another state. You have portability with regard to your position. I mean, not the specific position, but let's say, for example, for me, if I wanted another HR job anywhere else in the country, if one is available, once I'm in, I have the ability to move about and apply for certain postings that the general public would not be able to apply for. So there is some portability, and everything goes along with your benefits, your pay, etc., as long as you have a position that's comparable. So it's a good position to be in.
I have to say that sounds like a perk that's hard to beat. I want to thank all of you for taking the time here tonight and speaking about your careers, your lives. I'm answering these questions. I want to give a particular thank you to Carlos, who is now, I think, at 1:30 in the morning working from home. That's an awesome dedication that you're all showing to our students' future careers. So I want to thank you, thank you, thank you for this. For the listeners, the audience, I want to ask you to please spread the words about these webinars. We have a good turnout tonight. I still think there are more who can benefit from learning about these career options, because ultimately none of you are studying history because you want to stay at Cal State Fullerton. You're here for a couple of years, but you need to look ahead as to where you're going next. Unlike me, I'm sticking around, and I will see you hopefully in March for a webinar on careers in aerospace and other engineering and science fields, where we actually have alumni working as well. So I hope to see you then, and I will close the webinar now. I wish you all a good night, and thank you for participating.